Welcome to Continued Story Reading. I'm your host, Keith Borgelt. The next book that I'm going to be reading is the story of David Gates, the biography of David Gates. The name of it is Mission Pilot, and it's written by Eileen Lantry. David Gates has a small connection with this the studio where I'm recording this. The man who helped set the studio up had a faith camp just earlier this summer, and David Gates was the featured speaker at the faith camp. David Gates is the director of Missions International, and this is his biography. The man himself, I met him at this faith camp, and if you stick around to the end of this book, we're going to try to get him on the telephone for an interview at the end of this. As a matter of fact, one of the gentlemen that is associated with this studio, he's actually on the radio board here, has flown on missionary service with David Gates for Missions International. So we have a little bit of a connection here, and we've met him, and he is a fascinating gentleman. The story of the name of the book is Mission Pilot, and it starts out, "Doesn't look good, Professor. Fog has socked in the highlands." David Gates, an American mission pilot in his mid-20s, leaned forward in the cockpit of the Cessna 185 Skywagon and scanned the horizon. Thick clouds were draped low over the Sierra Madre of southern Mexico. "Must have rained heavily all day around here. I'm afraid the little airstrip by our hospital will be totally unsafe for landing." He spoke clear, precise Spanish with a Bolivian accent to the older Mexican man sitting in the co-pilot seat. "What's the problem, Capitan?" "The airstrip's in a low place. If the short grass is covered with water, the surface becomes slick as ice. Even at a slow landing speed, the brake become useless. I'd have no control over the plane, and we'd likely crash into a tree." With more than 10 years of experience as a pilot, David knew the danger they faced. He sat tense and stiff. "So what shall we do?" Professor Chente asked. "I'll fly low and circle the area several times. Maybe we can find a flat place on higher ground." The plane began to lose altitude and dropped below the clouds. "There it is." He pointed to the left. The rays of the setting sun highlighted the compound of the mission hospital, high school, and nursing school. Clustered around the perimeter were the homes of the doctor, nurses, and other workers. "See that little house there near the landing strip? That's where my family lives. I'm sure Becky and the kids are watching the sky for us now. Because of the repairs to my radio, they weren't finished at the airport. I can't give her a call." He circled the area again, coming lower this time. "That's just what I thought. A sheet of water over the short grass. We dare not land there. But it's also risky to leave the airplane in an unprotected area. The only safe place is in the hangar." "You're right," the professor, a supervisor of Seventh-day Adventist church schools, agreed. "I've heard that several private planes have been hijacked in the last couple months. The fuel gauge shows a minimum reserves, and it's almost dark. With no lights, we've got to make a decision now." David's favorite Bible passage, promise, flashed into his mind. "He who calls you is faithful, who will also do it." "Thanks, Lord," he prayed silently. "Please help me to make the right decision." There's the road that parallels the hospital. It's high, dry, and seldom used this time of evening. He circled the school until he saw someone waving. Then he scanned the road. No vehicles in sight. Dropping down toward the ground, he landed and parked the plane in a wide place at the side of the road. A teacher and the security guard soon arrived in a pickup truck. "I'm glad you didn't try to land on the airstrip. Rain has poured all day," the guard commented. "I'll stay in the plane tonight. You can lock me inside." "You can get out any time you want to," David said. "Just turn the knob." With fear in his voice, the guard exclaimed, No, I don't want anybody to know they can get in or out. Nothing is safe in this part of the country." "I'll be back early in the morning. Good night, and God be with you," David called. He walked along the gravel road through the lush green campus and gazed up at the darkening mountains in the distance. As he approached the driveway of his home, his two little girls squealed in delight. "Daddy, Daddy, you're home!" 1-year-old Carlos toddled on his chubby legs, hands outstretched. All smiles, their lovely blonde mother ran to meet the man she loved. "A king couldn't get a better welcome than this," David said joyfully as he hugged and kissed each one. Becky made sure everyone headed straight for the supper table. After David finished praying, Becky served the children and sat down next to David. She squeezed his hand and smiled. "The sound of your plane landing always thrills me, and I pray a prayer of gratitude to God." "I feel kind of heavenly, Joyce, sitting here next to you, eating your delicious food, listening to the children chatter. After all the problems I faced out there today, this is peace." After they finished eating, Becky suggested, "I'll clear the table later. Let's go to the living room and listen as Daddy tells us about his day." All three children climbed onto their father's lap, looking up with anticipation. "I tried over and over again, but failed to pull a young girl's infected tooth. The roots appear to curve in and join together at the tips. May be necessary to break the jawbone. When she screamed in pain, I promised I'd return as soon as possible with a dental surgeon. Her look of gratitude more than paid for the many other stops we made today." Always sympathetic, little Lena interrupted. "I'm so sorry she hurt so much. I'll pray to Jesus to fix it." "Thanks, honey. I'm glad you'll pray for her," David continued. "The professor and I visited several isolated schools that needed his help and were facing problems. We have to visit a few more tomorrow. I must get an early start because I need fuel." "I see some sleepy little people," Becky remarked with a smile. "Time for all of us to go to bed. But the children see so little of their daddy, I told them they could wait up for you." At 6 a.m. the next morning, a couple of high school students knocked on the front door of the Gates home. "Capitan, there are soldiers around your airplane and they want to see your documents." "No problem. Tell them I'll be right there." David turned to Becky. "I'm sure my documents are all in order. Let's see," he said, counting on his finger. "I have a letter from the president of the country thanking ADRA for the work they do, plus my credentials from the ADRA. I have permission from the director of civil aviation, one from immigration, another from customs. Everything required to operate an airplane here is in order." David turned to walk out the door, then stopped and came back to Becky. He joked, "Oh, I almost forgot to kiss you. In case I don't see you again, I want to give you a kiss." He was joking, but held her tight for a moment. Becky said she didn't see anything funny about it. Then he walked outside and met the professor. With the students, they drove in the school's pickup truck to the spot where he'd left the plane. "Good morning, gentlemen," David greeted the soldier standing by the plane. "I understand you wish to see my documents. You'll find everything in order." The soldier in charge, a captain, took the papers, looked them over carefully, and acknowledged that David was telling the truth. David noticed the name on his name tag, Gonzalez. "Are you the pilot who was flying this plane 2 years ago?" Captain Gonzalez asked. "No, I've been flying this plane for only a year and a half. The previous pilot left 2 years ago. I'm David Gates." Captain Gonzalez appeared to be confused by his answer. Going back to their truck, the soldiers huddled and talked while the captain spoke in his radio. Then the soldiers returned to David and the professor. "We will have to wait for instructions," the captain said. "Please stay right here." "Gentlemen, I'm scheduled to make urgent visits to several villages today. I just received a telegram saying a man is dying, needs to be evacuated. I was hoping to get a young girl with an infected tooth." "Well, you can't move until the general gives the orders." David felt impatient at the delay. He fidgeted and paced around the plane while the soldiers waited and waited. Turning to the captain, he asked, "Have you been here all night?" "Yes, we have." "Have you eaten supper or breakfast?" "Neither." David counted the soldiers. He called to one of the students standing nearby and said, "Please, go to the hospital. Bring back 10 trays of food for these soldiers. They're hungry." The students climbed into the pickup and drove away. Short time later, they returned with breakfast for each soldier. David stopped a passing truck and purchased a case of soft drinks. He handed one to each of the men. After they ate and drank, Captain Gonzalez smiled at David. "We had a good meal. Thanks a lot," he said. Finally, the soldiers heard the general's voice on the radio. Running to their truck, they listened for a few moments, then returned with the message. "The commanding officer wants you to fly a special runway." David recognized the name of the place. "But that's an abandoned runway." "That is where he will meet us." A feeling of dread came over David, and he broke out in a sweat. Orders to land on an abandoned runway surrounded by armed soldiers. Something seemed terribly wrong. "Sir, I prefer to land at the commercial runway just 5 miles from it. There's no reason for me to go there. You know everything's in order, so there's no problem." "You'll be coming right back, just a short stop for the general to check your papers." David didn't believe the captain. Getting more uncomfortable by the minute, he continued to resist. Finally, one soldier stuck his gun in David's back and ordered, "Get in the airplane." He knew he had no choice. Arguing wasn't going to work. The captain and another soldier climbed in the back of the airplane, and the professor and David got in the front. "I have a custom," David said, looking back at the two soldiers. "Before each flight, I pray to the God of heaven for protection. Would you kindly remove your hats and close your eyes?" They complied as David prayed, "My Father in heaven, we ask your blessing on each of the soldiers, on the professor and myself. Please protect us from harm and evil with your holy angels. I thank you in Jesus' name. Amen." David took off from the road filled with apprehension. Because he had removed the 2-meter radio to get it fixed, he had no way to inform anyone of his circumstances or destination. He would have given anything to talk to Becky. As they flew, he decided to act as if he were communicating over the radio. Putting the microphone to his mouth, he pretended to call the conference office. "Please advise Mexico City right away that we are headed for the abandoned airport. There may be some paperwork problems. Send a lawyer right away to deal with it." Captain Gonzalez, sitting behind David, heard every word. He did not know that David was talking to a dead radio. David ended with, Roger, yes, we'll be landing in a few minutes. Please send a legal advisor immediately." Still hesitant to land at the abandoned runway, David called back to the captain, "I'm going to land at the commercial runway." No, you can't. I have orders from the general that you must land as he instructed." "But you told me that I'm going to be flying back home in a few minutes. I need fuel or I won't have enough." "No. Orders are for you to land as the general said." "Then you'll just have to shoot me, won't you, because I am landing at the other runway." Captain Gonzalez began to act extremely nervous. On the ground at the commercial airport, David filled the plane with gas. He overheard the general's voice shouting over the captain's handheld radio. "Why did you let him land there?" the voice screamed angrily. "The pilot refused to obey. He said he needed fuel," Gonzalez explained. David spoke quietly to the airport air taxi operator. "Listen carefully. I am being hijacked. Call my wife or anyone at the mission hospital. Tell them I think I'll be held at the Air Force Base." He felt confident someone would try to find him or make contact with the right people. With the 4 men back in the plane, David took off and flew toward the abandoned airstrip. As soon as they landed, David felt a wave of swirling emotions. One soldier politely commanded, "Excuse me, leave the plane, stand over there. Please put your hands behind your back as I handcuff you. Kindly stand against the wall while I blindfold you." Then David heard another command, "Put the machine guns in their back. If they move, shoot them." "Is this for real?" he thought. As he stood perfectly still, he could hear the soldiers noisily ransacking the airplane. Soon after, they placed David and the professor in the back of the pickup truck. Knowing the roads in that area, David could sense the turns in the route that took them to the Air Force Base. He thought of John the Baptist, of whom the Bible says, "He came as a witness to testify concerning the light, so that through him all men might believe." That's John chapter 1, verse 7. "Please, God," he prayed, "whatever is ahead, stay close and help me witness for you." The truck stopped. The soldiers led them, still blindfolded, rapidly through long, narrow hallways with low doors. Fearful of banging his head, David ducked as low as he could. Finally, they entered a room. "Sit down," the rough voice of an interrogator ordered them. After a few minutes, guards took the professor to another room while David remained. An interrogation began immediately. For an hour, the soldiers questioned him. Then they placed David in the other room while they questioned the professor for an hour. The cycle repeated several times. David thought to himself, "This is part of a well-laid plan." Puzzled at the many irrelevant questions, David answered carefully, asking God for wisdom. "You are all good people, aren't you?" "Yes, we are." "You wouldn't do anything illegal, would you?" "Of course not." "But you did distribute Bibles." Knowing that the law barred for foreigners from distributing Bibles, David had never done it himself, so he answered, "No, I have not. I am a registered nurse. I do medical work." "Put down that he has distributed Bibles." "If you put that down, I won't sign your document." "Okay, strike it." The give and take of the interrogation lasted all day. Finally, Captain Gonzalez stopped everything. His voice sounded kind. "You know, these men haven't eaten. They fed us a good breakfast this morning. The least we can do is give them lunch. Bring in the other guy, take off their blindfolds, and handcuff them in front. Can I get you chicken sandwiches?" The professor answered, "Yes, thank you." David added, "I don't want to appear picky, but you wouldn't mind making mine an egg sandwich, would you?" "Not at all. Bring a chicken sandwich for him. Give the pilot an egg sandwich." After a few bites of sandwich, David remembered the small piece of paper in his pocket listing contact information of friends and church leaders. In tiny print were many names, phone numbers, and addresses. In the wrong hands, the information could be abused. He didn't want any church officials arrested on false charges. "What should I do? I need wisdom, God," he thought. An idea popped into his head. He looked around the room. The soldiers were talking quietly among themselves. Reaching with both handcuffed hands into his pocket, he pulled out the small piece of paper, stuck it into his egg sandwich, and ate it. After he chewed through the tough sandwich, he felt relieved. When they had finished eating, blindfolded again, and handcuffed behind their backs, the professor was pushed back into the interrogation room. The cycle of hour-long interrogations began again. Late in the afternoon, David could hear the professor's answers for the first time. Someone had left the door ajar by accident. "I hardly know Capitan Gates. Until just the other day we met for the first time. I don't know what he does." David squirmed. The professor and he had worked closely together ever since he had begun his job as a mission pilot. "So, he's buckling under fear and needs encouragement," David thought. When the soldiers brought David in for more questions, he spoke to the professor. "You have to tell the truth, Professor. If you start bending the truth, God cannot protect you. If they ever catch you telling an untruth, you'll hurt yourself. We know angels surround us. The soldiers can't touch us without God's permission. True, it appears we're prisoners now, but really, they are the prisoners and can only do what God allows them to do. Please don't be afraid to tell the truth." The professor turned his face towards the interrogators and said, "I'm sorry. I should have told you the truth. I work with David Gates and know him well. For almost 2 years we've done everything together. Please correct my statement. I got scared." Captain Gonzalez struck it all out. Then the blindfolds came off. David saw that a clerk had typed out 20 pages on an old typewriter. Nothing the soldiers had said gave David a clue as to why he'd been arrested. "Read it and sign your name," the captain said. David and the professor did as commanded. Then, blindfolded again, they were led by soldiers to the back of a pickup. David guessed they were in for a long ride over the mountains to the prison. He could tell when they were driving through town by the sounds around them. Just a few miles away, his precious wife and 2 little girls, Lena and Katrina, and their newly adopted boy, Carlos, waited for him. Now he knew how Joseph felt when the traders who were taking him to Egypt passed by the hills where Jacob his father lived. Why had God allowed this when David had prayed for wisdom and guidance? Did he have a plan to send him into a strange place as a witness to people who didn't know God, just as he sent Joseph? Confused and lonesome, David longed to be with his family. His heart began to break. Would he ever see them again? Rain pelted down on David and the professor as they huddled close to the cab. The winding road and the low gears told David they were beginning a journey over the mountains. He'd left home that morning in a short-sleeved shirt and without a coat. He could feel the cold wind clear through to his bones and began to shiver. "You look cold, Capitan," the guard said. "Yes, I am kind of cold." Taking off his jacket, the soldier placed it over the front of David's body and said in a kind voice, "Have my coat. You may keep it." "Thank you so much," David said aloud, and silently he prayed, "Lord, these acts of kindness, being fed lunch, this man giving me his coat, they tell me that you are in command. Please give me discernment to show little acts of kindness to disadvantaged people I meet on this journey." Blindfolded, bumping along the windy mountain road that night, David had time to think. No need to worry about what's ahead. He would place that in God's hand. In the darkness and cold, his mind focused on his beloved Becky. The years vanished as he recalled their cherished memories. David remembered what his parents had told him of the miracle God had performed to save him as an infant. Born with an intestinal atresia, and malrotation, that's where the intestines intermittently closed, and the appendix on the left side. David had no peristalsis, no nerve action that would move food along. The physician came to his mother, Merildine, who was then a nursing instructor at Washington Missionary College in Maryland. David's father, Richard, was studying at the seminary nearby, and said, "Mrs. Gates, your firstborn son will die. He cannot possibly live, even though we tried to do restorative surgery." During the first 3 weeks of David's life, the physician operated 3 times. He tried repairing the little intestines, but that didn't work. Later, he removed a large section of bowel, but this did not bring a cure either. On the 3rd try, he altered part of David's stomach, making a special connection to see if gravity would cause food to move down. Nothing seemed to help the infant, and no food passed through his intestines those first 3 weeks of life. "We're so sorry, but we can do nothing more," the doctor said sadly. "Your child will die." In faith, David's parents asked Dr. Leslie Harding to anoint their baby. Within 24 hours, a nurse began to hear bowel sounds for the first time. The doctor called for an X-ray of the baby's abdomen. Thrilled, the physician declared, "The appendix is now in the correct position. The intestines seem to be functioning normally, even though the baby was born without a working peristaltic nervous system." This agnostic physician continued, "If there is a God, he has spared this baby's life. I'm sure he must have great plans for him." David, only a year old when his missionary parents took him to the jungles of Bolivia, grew up speaking Spanish. His father, a pastor and mission pilot, took the family from the lowland jungles to visit the city of La Paz when David was 3. The 14,000-foot altitude made the little boy sick. He still remembers his first glimpse of a pretty blonde girl there. The girl's mother said to him, "David, this is our 6-year-old daughter, Becky Sue." Becky brought out games and puzzles, but before they played, she said with a smile, "Would you mind if I combed your messed-up hair?" Her motherly attention made him feel better. Later she suggested, "Let's do finger painting. We can paint the mountains all covered with snow that we see out the window." Filled with all kinds of ideas, she kept him occupied until he forgot his headache and nausea. Becky's father, Monroe Dale Dirksen, treasurer of the Bolivian Mission of Seventh-day Adventists, often visited the jungle lowlands where David lived. He occasionally brought his family along. David happily suggested projects, and Becky followed along. Tramping barefoot through the jungle, they collected flowers and caught colorful butterflies and unusual beetles. Sometimes they worked together on paint-by-number projects. "We need to earn money to buy ice cream and gum. Got any ideas?" David asked one day. "Let's each paint a picture of Jojo, my beautiful monkey," Becky suggested. That took a while because Jojo wouldn't sit quietly for his portrait. When they were finished, David said, "I like our pictures of your pet monkey. Here's my idea. Let's find lids from cans and punch holes and put strings in the hole for a picture frame. We'll paste our monkey pictures and the best of our number paintings on the lid frames and sell them." The little entrepreneurs found many buyers as they stopped at the houses in the village. The Gates and Dirksen families once traveled together on the missionary launch, stopping to treat the sick at each village. David remembered having his 5th birthday on that trip. When the two were a little older, David and Becky loved to go fishing from the bow of the launch. I guess that's bow, isn't it? When the two were a little older, David and Becky loved to go fishing from the bow of the launch. He loved to hear Becky laugh as they threw the fish back into the water and watched them swim away. "Let's build a tree house," David suggested one day. "But we can't climb that high on the trunk," Becky objected. "No, but let's bring the tree down to us and make a house in the branches. I know how to use an axe and a machete." With millions of trees making up the Bolivian jungle, the loss of one didn't bother the little builders. For 3 days they chopped until it fell. Going barefoot, they found it easy to climb up the now horizontal trunk to make a cozy treehouse in the branches. But when the leaves dried up, they found their house less inviting, turned to other adventures. The mission purchased property in the lowlands, and the two families were involved in starting a cattle ranch. Here, local students could work for a year to earn money to attend school. Becky's family lived in a small house. When David's family came to visit, all the kids had to sleep in one room. "This is great," Becky giggled. We can tell stories and have fun before we sleep." That night, David slept in a hammock above Becky. With her foot, she pushed the hammock, swinging him to sleep. Suddenly, he got sick and vomited. Becky pretended to be asleep, fearing she'd be accused of making David sick. When David reached the age of 8, he announced to Becky, "When I get big, I'm going to marry you." "Oh, you are? Okay, I'll be happy to marry you when we're old enough," the 11-year-old girl responded. Deciding he needed to give Becky an engagement present, David took his savings to a shop in the small town of Santa Ana. "I want to buy a bottle of perfume." "You want perfume? You got a girlfriend already?" "Well, sort of." Pleased with his purchase, he gave Becky the pretty little bottle. A few days later, Becky's brother, Jimmy, approached David. "You know what Becky does with that perfume you gave her? She puts it on her monkey after she gives him a bath." David felt heartbroken. She was using his engagement gift on a monkey. He didn't understand girls, nor did he realize that this monkey was very, very special to Becky. For 7 years, she'd taken it everywhere she went, dressed it up, and loved it dearly. Every Friday after her bath, she'd bathe Jojo. When she put perfume on herself, she put it on him too. When Becky turned 13, her parents moved back to the United States so that her father could study at Loma Linda University in California. During her high school years, Becky jumped around to many schools in Louisiana, Arkansas, Kentucky, and Tennessee. David and Becky didn't see each other for many years. David never knew that Becky had not rejected his perfume love gift. Many years later, he learned her motive. She had shared her treasured gift with the animal she loved the most. David's family left South America for Andrews University in Michigan when he was 11. Later, they lived in Collegedale, Tennessee, for 10 years. David remembered the thrill he felt when he met Becky again, but time and circumstances had changed them, and he began to feel uncomfortable. Would she, a student at Southern Missionary College, have anything to do with a high school kid? In her heart, Becky knew she still had feelings for David. Each year on his birthday, she'd think of him and their long-ago promise to each other. Would they ever be together? One Sabbath, the Gates family, who lived near the university, invited Becky and her roommate Joy for lunch. After they'd eaten, David suggested, "I've got a cow to milk. Would you girls like to come with me?" As they walked toward the barn, David remarked to Joy, "Your long hair is so beautiful." Becky felt a twinge of jealousy and thought, "He's noticing her and not me." Right then, she determined to let her short hair grow. Neither David nor Becky ever mentioned the childhood promise. The differences in age and education seemed overwhelming, and each of them was dating someone else. Feeling sick at heart, David concluded that he no longer had a chance to marry Becky. True, when they happened to meet, they would always visit briefly as friends. But even as they chatted, Becky thought, "He's just a kid. He's got no interest in me now." And David thought he was too young for her. It seemed to mean the end of those childhood dreams. Suddenly, David's pleasant reveries came to an abrupt halt as the pickup truck slowed down and stopped. He heard a gate creak and realized they had arrived at the prison. Captain Gonzalez took off the blindfolds and ordered them to come with him. David glanced at his watch. 3 o'clock in the morning. The men chatted along the way, almost like friends. The prison guards saluted as they entered. "I have 2 prisoners for you," the captain said. "Put them in cell A, right there, but I don't want you to lock the cell door." "Captain, what did you say?" "They're prisoners. And you say you don't want me to lock the cell door?" "No, these gentlemen will not run away. I also want you to leave the door open. That's an order. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." As the captain left, he called out, "Good night, gentlemen." The guard walked over to David and the professor. "I've been working here a long time," he said, "and I've never had a prisoner that I couldn't lock up. This is strange. But let me tell you one thing. Don't you